Well, hello everyone. Welcome back. And today I have a very special guest. Simland is actually here with us, and he is an author of several books, amazing books, specializing in autophagy, which is what we're going to talk about, and fasting and keto. He's also a great content creator. He's a holistic health practitioner, and he's also a high performance coach. So welcome, Sim. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing really good. I'm glad to talk with you.
Excellent. So you are going to be speaking at our summit coming up, so I'm very excited about that. I already got your slides, and people are going to be blown away. And the first thing I want to talk about is did you get into this topic of fasting because you had a personal problem, or was it just you're just interested in it?
Uh, I never had like any health issues, so I've basically been pretty healthy throughout my entire life. But I got into intermittent fasting when I was doing, weightlifting and bodybuilding in high
Ah,
school. So it kind of just became more of like a dieting tool and just a nutritional tool. So I tried it out first, and I just started enjoying it. And then from there on, I also just delved a lot into more of the research and started writing about it in my blog, which then turned into the YouTube channel and several books and podcasts.
interesting, because usually in universities and they don't really emphasize fasting or low carb. It's usually high carb, right? So you kind of just found out about it somehow?
Yeah, like I did my own like research on YouTube and
Okay.
discovered like different and also like listening to different podcasts and learning about keto from there and just trying it out myself.
Ah, okay, great. Awesome. And you also went to school for, I think, an anthropology, right?
Yeah, I it's a bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology.
Did you get into, ancient civilizations as far as what they ate back then? Was that a topic that was covered extensively, or?
We did have like a few modules about history and hunter-gatherer specifically. So yeah, we did cover a lot. Like I remember like one of my final essays was on the topic of why the hunter-gatherers converted over into like the agriculture and that sort of thing, and like kind of changed the entire history, so to say.
Wow.
And it was quite fascinating actually. That it wasn't like this pre-planned thing, or it wasn't like it wasn't like a natural outgrowth of like evolution or society. It was more like a coincidence because over like 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, the hunter-gatherer populations were already constantly moving in between being a hunter-gatherer for some seasons, and for other seasons they were already growing crops. So they just probably embraced this sort of like a very seasonal lifestyle. And for some reason, or in a very coincidental manner, there was this during one period they eventually hunted out all of their most available game meat, so to say. They out hunted like this gazelle population. There was also like a very cold season, so there wasn't uh, a lot of food in total. So they were kind of forced into starting these small villages, and then
Interesting.
from there on, the hunter or the farmers just had like a slight edge over the hunters because they were able to store food for much longer, and therefore they just like out competed the hunters in a very coincidental manner.
Wow. Fascinating. Did I wonder if there's a lot any data on the type of foods they ate back then, as far as the hybrids that are now, like let's say fruits versus vegetables back then. I mean, you didn't have watermelon, you didn't probably have these sweet apples like they had. They probably had, bitter apples. Is there any data on that? I couldn't find any, actually.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the food was like more fibrous, less carbs, less energy in total, less sugar, and yeah, more like the harsher to digest, I would imagine. So yeah, like it's so true that the apple or the the watermelon is completely different nowadays than it was even just a few decades ago. So like in the 10,000 years ago, the foods were completely different.
Wow. And then what about, I'm sure like even the banana wasn't that sweet back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, as far as there's been some data on, just out of curiosity, the since you study this, what about the amount of the quantity of potassium foods like vegetables? Is there data? I've heard references that sometimes they eat as much as like 11,000 grams of potassium foods. Is that, you ever heard anything about that?
I'm not really sure about that. So like they probably were, it depends on the location as well. So like if the population is more near to the equator, then they would probably get more potassium from like fruits and vegetables and those things. And likewise, all hunter-gatherers did some form of foraging. So they all got a little bit of potassium from those sources. Not sure if they got exactly like 11,000. I would imagine maybe, probably changed throughout the seasons and changed also like on a daily basis.
Is there, and then one last question and then we'll start our interview. What about, did you ever find any data on like the earliest, did they find any humans early on stuck in the ice that were preserved that they were able to dissect in the stomach and see what they ate, like the earliest man?
Well, I recall one of the oldest like mummified humans they found in ice. Well, I think his name was like Otzi or something in Switzerland, I think in the Alps, and he had actually like a patch of some like mushrooms. So in the mountains, eating these medicinal mushrooms and different kinds of fungi is probably a really more easable source of nutrition. And I think the humans back then, they ate whatever they could find. So it probably consisted of both different kinds of roots and vegetables, as well as meats and fowl and fish even.
Makes total sense. Okay, great. Well, thank you. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get into autophagy. For those of you that are new, it might be a new topic. For those of you, probably most of you know about it, but can you give us a real basic kind of an idea of what autophagy is?
Yeah, sure. Like autophagy translates into self-eating, and it describes this intracellular process where different particles and weaker components of the cell or dysfunctional components of the cell are being recycled. And it even is involved in the immune system functioning and reducing or fighting reactive oxygen species and pathogens. So yeah, it's a very intrinsic part of the functioning of the cell, and there is always like some form of basal autophagy happening on a daily basis. So fluctuates on depending on what you do, but generally autophagy is more of like a response to some form of like a stress or like energy deficit. So it gets activated primarily when you're either fasting, you're restricting your calorie intake, you're doing some form of exercise, or you're exposed to some other kind of stress, with even like even things like the EMF or electromagnetic frequencies can turn on autophagy to a certain extent. Blue light does it, and the sauna, the cold a little bit. So yeah, it's like a so like a cellular stress response, and the main purpose is to like just recycle, kind of tighten the budget, so to say, recycle the ingredients and the components of the cell that aren't necessary and that are just unneeded.
Interesting. So I would imagine in the area of cancer, when you're doing fasting, and fasting in general, if we just talk about fasting related to cancer, do you have any data that you can share with, I guess, both turning on certain genes and expressing certain genes and turning off other genes, as well as autophagy, because as you're cleaning up damaged mitochondria and DNA damage, you're going to basically help reduce the risk of cancer.
The kind of current consensus, as I've seen from the researchers, is that autophagy is great for disease prevention and preventing yourself from getting sick from different kinds of diseases. Like it can protect against insulin resistance and atherosclerosis, as well as some malignant tumors and cancers. But at the same time, there's also a lot of research showing that in the presence of an already existing malignancy or a tumor, then the process of autophagy can also promote its survival, so to say, because autophagy is, like I said, it's a recycling process, and it doesn't have like an objective judgment about what's good or what's bad, what's a good cell, what's a bad cell. So the idea is that the cancer cell is just going to steal the energy that gets created from autophagy, and it's going to use it for its own benefit. And if you inhibit the process of autophagy, then you can see that it could help to, in some cases, get rid of or like starve out some of the cancer. So it's a very complex situation, and it's very context dependent. So not all cancers benefit from autophagy, and some of them can actually, die from it, whereas some others don't. So it's I wouldn't say that it's going to cure cancer, so to say. It's great for preventing yourself from getting sick and kind of keeping your house clean. But at the same time, if you're already sick, then I wouldn't place all of my bets on it. And the research also says, that there are potentially some negative side effects to it.
Got it. What about fasting in general? You have the starving off of glucose and glutamine, which cancer can consume, but also you have the expression of certain genes. Do you have any data on that as far as related to cancer? Turning off, genes that are related to triggering cancer or growing cancer?
Well, yeah, like for example, well, I do know that ketosis and fasting can inhibit HDACs, which are associated with aging and cancers as well. So they're histone deacetyl, I'm not sure what the full name is yet, but essentially they are these related inhibitors that can be caused with some diseases. But yeah, like autophagy is also like, it promotes some other forms of health as well. Like usually autophagy is activated when you are under energy stress, and for example, it's turned on by this particular pathway or the fuel sensor called AMPK, which promotes the kind of fuel mobilization of the entire body, as well as ketosis, and that has been shown to have like anti-aging effect as well as a disease protection.
Okay. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I had a very interesting person call me. He's been studying autophagy and fasting and keto, and about a few years ago he came down with a diagnosis of prostate cancer stage 4, spread metastasis to his bones, and he started getting bone pain through the rib cage and spread all over through his body. And not only did he already have diabetes and every other symptom, metabolic disease, but he came down with this cancer. And so the doctor said, sorry, we can give you some drugs for the pain, but there's nothing we can do. He goes to 3 different doctors, and then he starts going on YouTube. He starts studying on YouTube and learns about fasting. So, he's a pretty smart guy, because there's some data that was shown that if you fast for too long, you can deprive yourself of nutrients, and that doesn't help the immune system. That can actually make things worse. So what he did is he did a 45-day fast. Now normally you wouldn't go that long, but he did because he wasn't hungry and he had a lot of weight to tap into. But what he did is something that I don't think there's a lot of research on, and I think there's a little bit of data on, but it's hard to find it. He just took a lot of nutrients while he was fasting, because when people say you're going to do a true fast, you're not going to take anything else. Well, he took a lot of nutrients, and he also took concentrated phytonutrients, like out of garlic, and turmeric, and several other ones that were, they've been known to help to inhibit the formation of cancer. So he was doing all that, and for 45 days. And so he went back to the doctor, and the bone cancer was gone. It was negative, and so was his prostate cancer. And so he is, the doctors just don't know what to don't know what to even think of it. You would think they would be like, wow, let's find out what you did. They weren't even interested. But anyway, he wanted to tell me a story. I did an interview on him. I'm going to release the video probably on Monday, but fascinating data on what happened to his body when he did a 45-day fast with nutrients. I mean, out of all the people that I know that had stage 4, I've never met anyone who survived. I don't know. Have you?
No, not really. And it's like a really, I've also heard like similar stories where people go on this very long fast and even do things like dry fasting and those things. But yeah, like I would imagine, giving your body some of those nutrients is also very beneficial because some of those compounds that you mentioned, like the turmeric, it can also promote further autophagy as well. So these different compounds, polyphenolic compounds and plant compounds, ginger, cinnamon, cayenne pepper, berberine, they also can turn on autophagy and have like other medicinal benefits.
Yeah, fascinating. So yeah, I'm just learning all about, learning exactly what he did, because obviously it worked for him, and it's some great data. But yeah, so I'll share some of the stuff that he found that I've never even heard before. He found some data, and I don't know if you've ever heard this, that there's some differences between the ketones that are generated from fasting versus the ketones that are generated from diet. Have you ever heard that before?
Yeah, like the only difference that I've seen has to do with some of the ratios between NAD and NADH as well. So for example, for clarification, NAD is like this coenzyme in the body that's involved with virtually all processes, and especially in the metabolism. And NAD is fluctuating, or it's cycled between NAD plus and NADH. And if your energy is, let's say, lower, your energy status is lower, like when you are fasting, then your NAD is higher than NADH, whereas if you're eating, then your NADH is higher. And NAD is like a role in anti-aging and just general longevity. So the older you get, the less NAD you have, and the sicker you are, the also less NAD you have. So that's why probably fasting can help with raising your NAD levels, and the way it does it is by promoting the recycling of NAD, because NAD is like the majority of your NAD on a daily basis is being created from this the salvage pathway, which is not derived from diet. It's derived from the recycling of the NAD, and fasting as well as exercise are one of the most the best ways of going about it, because the AMPK that I mentioned is needed for turning on that salvage pathway. So you need to do something that puts on like energy stress on the system in order to regenerate your NAD.
That's fascinating, because you'll have people that are trying out keto, and instead of going on the keto diet, they take some exogenous ketones, and as a supplement, they think they're really doing keto and they're going to get all the benefits. Not quite. What's your thought on this comment that a lot of people make? Well, I don't want to do fasting because I'm going to lose all my muscles.
Well, yeah, it's a fair point, or a fair concern, because you don't want to become emaciated or lose your muscle mass, because muscle mass is really important for just longevity as well as metabolic flexibility. So with more muscle mass, the more carbohydrates you can also tolerate, and the more insulin sensitive you are, the more glycogen you have to store, and you'll also be able to just get away with more calories without gaining weight. So from a functional perspective as well as aesthetic perspective, muscle mass is really important. And fasting fasting is like an inherently catabolic state. You are like breaking down your tissue, and if you don't compensate for it with adequate nutrition, then eventually, you will start to lose muscle. So yeah, that's why the key aspect of it is to make sure that even if you are doing some fasting, that you also refeed properly and you get like the key nutrients needed for muscle maintenance and growth, especially like protein is the most important thing. So combining like a low protein diet with intermittent fasting is not a good idea, because you're staying in a very catabolic state and you're not getting enough like building blocks for promoting muscle maintenance.
So isn't there also a protective mechanism that does tend to conserve protein fibers when you do a fast?
Yeah, there certainly is. Like growth hormone, which gets released while fasting, does have a like anti-catabolic effect, and it promotes fat burning and maintains muscle mass, as well as ketosis or ketones themselves. Ketones have anti-catabolic effects, and autophagy even has some anti-catabolic effects. But it's more of like in a hormetic way, that a small amount of autophagy and small amounts of catabolism makes your body more resilient against it. So if you never experience any like fasting, or if you never experience any small amounts of muscle catabolism, then you would like wither away really, really fast if you ever skip a meal, so to say, because like the body needs this small amount of stress in order to actually get stronger and benefit from it. But at the same time, like, eating an actual meal is still more muscle preserving than any kind of fasting, although the fasting is very beneficial in doing it. So if you were to fast when you're not in ketosis, then that's much more catabolic than if you were to fast when you are in ketosis. So that's why I believe like combining fasting with some form of a keto diet is much healthier, or is much easier as well, because you'll just feel more energized and you'll get less hungry because you'll just be burning like the fats and ketones.
Versus someone doing intermittent fasting and doing a high carb diet, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, like I believe like it's still better than nothing. Like you can still do intermittent fasting and gain some of the benefits if you are doing like a high carb diet. It's just gonna be, from my own and others people experience, it's usually slightly harder, because you're running on this glucose burning engine, and once your glucose runs out, then you go into like a mild energy crisis, which doesn't really happen if you are like fully keto adapted. You'll just tap into your body fat and not experience like any energy dips, or you won't get hungry during the daytime.
And then this is probably another good reason why you should exercise, to keep your muscle mass there, right? Because exercise does stimulate the growth of muscle.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's the like most important part of it. Like you need to send a signal to the body that it needs to have muscle.
Yeah. So I guess the key too, if you were to do fasting and you were to do and you want to preserve your muscles and you're eating protein, but you're massively stressed out, the cortisol spikes. That's probably not going to be good to preserve muscle.
Yeah, like cortisol breaks down muscle tissue, but at the same time, cortisol also mobilizes fat. So it's a very, again, depends on the dose. A little bit of cortisol is good, but too much is bad. And if you're chronically stressed out, then eventually, you're going to lose your hair. You're going to imbalance your hormones and lose muscle mass and cause problems sleeping. So in most cases, the morning rise in cortisol, which happens after you wake up, is beneficial because it's gonna start the day. But you don't want to have like high amounts of cortisol in the evening and when you're about to go to bed.
Yeah, so there's a difference between the chronic overwhelming stress and some intermittent stress that you can recover from, especially like I know women when they go through menopause, and let's say they get some overwhelming personal problems that just can't go away. Boy, they can really wither down and just get atrophy like crazy. So I've seen that many times.
Yeah.
I want to mention this topic that's confusing for a lot of people. Maybe you could help educate people in a way that's very simple, mTOR. Like, what is mTOR in the simplest version that you could explain?
Yeah, well, in the simplest way I can say it's the growth switch in the body that promotes growth of all cells, whether that be muscle cells, nerve cells, immune cells, and even some cancer cells, as well as fat cells in some cases as well. So it's like a all-encompassing growth switch, and mTOR in small amounts and in the right dose is great because it's again useful for muscle building and muscle maintenance. So without mTOR you would die because you would just wither away eventually. But if your mTOR is chronically activated and it's expressed in excess, then that can also cause some disease. Like for example, a good sign of too much mTOR activation is acne and skin problems, because it's related to IGF-1 as well. So some form of higher blood sugar, diabetes, that can be a result from too much mTOR, and the worst case scenario is some cancers and malignancies because of the same growth promoting aspect.
So how would we translate that into something practical? Like, what would you want to do to not overdo it, to create not too much mTOR, but just enough? Is it just related to what we talked about as your stress and the overwhelming stress versus a little bit of stress here and there?
It's not really, mTOR is raised by some key factors. Like one of them is protein, amino acids. The second one is like carbohydrates and insulin. And the third is overall calories. So if you're eating too many calories, then your mTOR is already going to be turned on to a certain extent. And lastly, it's also the eating frequency. So basically, if you eat a bunch of junk food all the time, very often, then your mTOR is going to be turned on all the time. Mm. So the best way to kind of mitigate that is to cut down on the eating frequency, skip a few meals, do some intermittent fasting, and as well as limit your carbohydrate intake and not spike your insulin all the time. So because you can choose to either restrict carbs or restrict protein. So if you restrict your protein, then that can have like a negative effect on your muscle maintenance, and just because protein is more essential than carbohydrates. You need protein to survive, but you don't need carbs to survive. So it's like which one are you going to choose? So you could have both, but yeah, the idea is to not overeat either of them. And just fixing insulin resistance is also important, because if you have like a higher blood sugar all the time throughout the entire day, like a pre-diabetic, then that's also like going to at least turn on mTOR to a certain extent. So you're going to be in this insulinemic state all the time.
What would you recommend for someone as far as the amount of protein someone should consume at a given meal?
Well, if we're talking about like one particular meal, then I would say that if you do eat a meal, then the goal of that meal should be to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, because that's going to, first of all, it's going to trigger the maintenance of muscle tissue. And if you're trying to build muscle tissue, then it's also needed to consume at least a certain amount of protein to make it happen. And the research shows that the minimal effect comes from at least 2.6 grams to 3 grams of leucine per meal, and which leucine is the most anabolic amino acid that turns on mTOR, and you can get that amount usually from at least 30 grams of protein. So I think the minimal amount of protein you should get from one meal should be 30 grams. And the upper threshold for that appears to be around 40 grams. So there's not going to be a additional benefit beyond 40 grams.
Interesting.
But it doesn't mean that you can't eat more protein per meal either. Your body is just going to slow down some of the digestion, and it's going to absorb it like later in a few hours. So you could even eat a single days of protein in one sitting in one meal, and the body wouldn't lose, or you're not gonna waste it away. Your body's still gonna absorb all the protein. It's just gonna do it in a slower manner. And
so if we look at that in ounces, would sounds to me that would be something between, I guess, 3.5 to 7 ounces. What's your conversion on that?
I'm not sure. Like I don't use ounces, but
Okay.
like 30 grams of protein depends on the protein source as well. Like
Yeah, right.
if we're talking about like chicken breast, then I think one chicken breast has at least like 30 grams or 40 grams. Whereas if we're talking about like salmon, then salmon has a little bit less. So yeah, it depends on the protein source. But I like to I like to look at the grams, and usually like maybe at least like a fist sized is like a piece of meat or something is like 40 grams, I think.
Okay, good. So, I mean, even like if you do eggs, which is very bioavailable, one egg is 7 grams.
Yeah.
So we're talking, you can do the
Yeah,
math,
like
but
four or five eggs is perfect for that, because eggs also has very high in leucine, so you can get the all the leucine that you need for that stimulation from like 4 eggs, 5 eggs.
and you're talking per meal or per day?
Per meal, yeah. Like in total, the research shows that there isn't, even for like high level physique athletes and sports people, there's no benefit beyond eating 0.8 grams per pound of lean body mass per day. So that's like the upper threshold that no one really needs to consume beyond. And for the average person who just works out on a regular basis, then for them they could get away with like 0.7 grams per pound of body weight. I do believe that the slightly higher protein intake is better, because the RDA for protein is really low. Like the RDA for protein is like 0.4 grams per pound of body weight, which is just like the bare essentials for surviving and not withering away. So for optimal, because like the research shows that the higher protein diets tend to be better for body composition. They tend to increase like fat loss, as well as increase muscle growth, and they're also like slightly more satiating, so people naturally tend to undereat when they do increase their protein intake a little bit. So I would aim for like, for more, let's say for example, a person who weighs, let's say 150 pounds or 160 pounds, then for them they could eat maybe like 120 grams of protein per day, or 100 grams of protein at least, like the minimum. That's what I would aim for.
Okay. And then if obviously if someone is younger and they have a fast metabolism and they don't have insulin resistance, instead of continuing to go up with the protein, maybe they should add more fat as calories?
Yeah, like the well, if they were to be eating more protein, then the extra protein will eventually be converted into glucose
Right.
and sugar, basically, which isn't necessarily like a bad thing, but it's just, you could also eat carbs at that point, so you're not getting like additional muscle building benefits from that. You're just wasting more energy for digesting that protein. But yeah, like adding either, once you have hit the like the goal for your protein intake, then the way to go up from that, and if you still have like calories for the day, then that will be either like fats or carbs. So depending on your preference, I personally do like to have more fats because of just trying to maintain some aspects of ketosis, but I'm not like really strict with my carbs either. So I'm like eating plenty of vegetables, so I'm not afraid of getting kicked out of ketosis because of eating like broccoli or cauliflower. So
Right.
it's like the fibrous carbs are pretty benign in my opinion, and they don't really affect my like ketones and blood sugar.
No, mine either. So just so people got that, it's 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, right?
No, point per pound.
Oh, per
Lean
pound.
body mass.
Okay, so you add that calculation. So it's 0.8 grams per pound of body weight.
Yeah, that's the upper threshold. And for if you are like really doing a lot of like exercise, then you could also get for like 1 gram per pound, but 0.8 is already, at least the research shows that that's already optimal dose.
Okay.
At the maximum. And the minimum I would say is like 0.6 or 0.7 per gram.
Yeah. So if your metabolism is let's say your digestion is really bad, and you have problems digesting protein, maybe you need to go a little lighter than that. Kind of vary depending on what's going on with your physiology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like it's a very individual based thing. So if a person like I still find a lot of merit from doing like a very strict keto diet, like the therapeutic keto diet, for people who have like some insulin resistance, some severe diabetes, or like epilepsy and those things. And yeah, if they do have like some problems digesting protein, then yeah, for sure, keeping the protein more moderate is better in that sense, because at that point you can still leverage a lot of the anti-catabolic effects of the ketosis itself as well.
Absolutely. Another question that people always ask is that if I take MCT oil during a fast, will that break my fast? I get that so often. I just want to see your intake on that. Yeah,
it's a common question, and you know, MCTs are like a really interesting like substance. So they're not like they have a very thermic effect. So they raise your metabolism because of being converted into energy really rapidly. So they bypass some of the steps in digestion and energy production. So they get converted into energy really fast, and you know, a lot of the times if people take too much MCT oil, then they can also get the runs, so goes out really quick as well.
Right.
But generally from the calorie perspective, like the calories, it depends on like what you mean by breaking a fast. It has calories, so therefore it could break a fast, but at the same time it doesn't spike insulin, it doesn't raise blood sugar, it actually boosts ketone body production, and it also stimulates some aspects of autophagy. So there's a different type of autophagy called chaperone-mediated autophagy, which is like a subcategory, and it targets specifically certain amino acids. So like rather than going for like this macro autophagy, you would go for more of like very specific type of autophagy that recycles amino acids specifically. So I think having like some MCT oil in your coffee or something, then that's not a problem in my opinion, as long as you're not really overdoing the calories. So like one tablespoon of MCT oil is pretty fine in my opinion, and it's actually boosts a lot of the goals of the fast by putting you into deeper ketosis and turning on some autophagy as well.
That's interesting. That's great. Your book, you have a new one coming out, right? I don't think it's released yet. I think it's called Stronger by Stress. Is that coming out? Is that out yet?
No, it's coming out in August, in middle of August.
Oh, okay, good. So then we can actually talk. We can actually bring it up at the event. And so you also have quite a few books. How many books do you have out?
Well, it's like 5, I would say 5.
Yeah. And so I think the one that seems to be the most popular, I don't know, it's the Metabolic Autophagy. Is that the one that?
Yeah. It's my latest book, and yeah, it's the most comprehensive and the biggest.
So I'm going to just recommend that everyone get that book, and I'm going to put a link down below simply because autophagy, understanding it can make you live longer. It can actually help you prevent so many problems. It could increase your performance, your anti-aging. I mean, it's just so many things. And I think you've done an exhaustive study. I appreciate that. As I went through it, I'm like, boy, you've done some serious research on this. I mean, like you've looked at everything, and because it takes a lot of time to dig out all this stuff and summarize it and communicate it in a way that everyone can get it. So I'm like, thank you for summarizing the whole topic into one book.
Yeah.
I mean, how many hours did you put into that book?
Well, I did like a lot of research beforehand, so I was already writing out articles for like a few weeks, and then I took like a small break from writing, because I didn't plan on writing the book, but like I saw that there was like a lot of misconceptions about autophagy and just myths and rumors, so I wanted to kind of refute them. Like one of them being that autophagy is only good, that you want to turn on autophagy all the time for the rest of your life, which isn't the true, like we talked about earlier in this podcast, that sometimes it can actually be harmful. So yeah, you have to find like the optimal balance between it. and know how to balance it with like mTOR and just adequate nutrient intake.
Awesome. This has been awesome. So thank you so much for your time, and hopefully everyone could make it to the summit coming up at the end of August. I'll put the links down below, and then you have a very amazing presentation that everyone needs to be there, because you're going to go through this topic extensively, because I saw the slides and it's quite exciting. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.